Always a pleasure to welcome our boy Carter Hutton to the program. And let's dig into this Stanley Cup Final rematch, Carter, between Stuart Skinner and Sergei Bobrovsky. And for the second straight year, it's Stuart Skinner coming into this series after playing really well in the Western Conference Final. How much of Skinner's play is him turning his game around? How much of it is the Oilers just playing really well in front of him?
I think a little bit of both. You know what I mean? You're always going to be a product of your team, right? At this point in the year, you're not going to make the Stanley Cup Final without a team playing well in front of you. But that being said, I think he's got more to draw upon this year, right? You look back on history's past and being in the playoffs, and we know the Jekyll and Hyde we've seen of Stuart Skinner, but for me, it's the experience base, right? Now he has something to fall back on. He's been that guy that's had a big chunk of time off, and rolling into the finals, it's very similar to sitting on the bench, watching Calvin Pickard go 6-0. And then he has to jump back in there, and he played very well in rounds 2 and in the Western Conference Final in a bunch of games where I thought he was the difference maker early on, in a few periods where, you know, the ice was tilted a bit in the Dallas Stars' favor. So that being said, I think he's a different goalie than he was in years past. You know, again, experience is a very valuable asset as a goalie. So I look for him to be strong. And I think a key component to this series, and compared to last year, is getting to start at home for the Edmonton Oilers.
So there's no doubt that Stuart Skinner has been excellent the last round and a half or so. That said, now knowing that Cal Pickard is healthy, if Skinner falters at all, how short would your leash be if you're Chris Knobloch, knowing that you can't get down in a hole again in this series?
Yeah, I definitely think there is a leash, Frank, but the fact of the matter is, if the Edmonton Oilers are going to win the Stanley Cup, I really believe it's going to have to be on Stuart Skinner's shoulders. So I feel like there will be that pull. And again, he did go 6-0, but his save percentage was .888. Like, he wasn't like stealing games. He was making timely saves, and the offense they created, as Edmonton Oilers can, I don't think it's going to be as just the same against this Florida Panthers team. They're just going to jar it up. It's going to be really hard to create. I think Sergei Bobrovsky's a lot different than facing Darcy Kemper. So that being said, I do think there is a bit of a leash, you know, if you see a bad game, but I don't expect them to jump quickly to Calvin Pickard and give him a game. I think the way Skinner's played and the fluctuation in his game, I think they're ready to try to ride this out here with Stuart Skinner.
So Sergei Bobrovsky has earned himself the reputation of being a big game goalie. You think back to Game 7 last year, you think about the way that he's been able to elevate his game at key times. But there's also been a little part of his game where it almost feels like he's a bit of a switch flipper, a guy that can start a series a little bit slow and wade into it, knowing that the moment isn't there or the right time isn't there. What do you make of his playoffs to this point? And is it as good as it was last year?
It's really hard to say how good it is. Like, I don't think it's been as good, Frank, but from that Game 3 in Toronto, when they're down 3-1, it looked like it was a stranglehold. And then you look back on them coming back in that game, some big saves he made in overtime, especially a couple breakaways by Nylander. And then all of a sudden it's like a switch came on. And that's a switch you're talking about where he gets so dialed in. And I credit that circling back to experience. This is a guy that's been there. He's done it all. And he's not very emotionally tied to hockey games. Whether it's a big goal for his team or a bad goal against, he stays pretty even keel. And that's something that is so valuable as a goalie at this level and at this stage. So that being said, he's going to have to be a difference maker. Again, this is a big chunk of time off. And yes, they had a chunk of time off last year and the year before they went to play Vegas. I believe at the Vegas one, they had 9 days off. And going into that series, they had to start on the road. And we all know how that series went. It didn't go very well. They lost games 1 and 2 in Vegas, and Sergei Bobrovsky was not very good. And in the Game 5, the final game, he wasn't very good. So there's a different, opinion to draw on. But I think the rest favors Stuart Skinner in this sense because of the fact he's dealt with this. He literally just had a big chunk of time off, and now he's got to come in. And I honestly, truly believe starting at home for the Edmonton Oilers and Skinner is going to have the advantage in the goaltending area.
What's interesting about these two guys is when they're at their best, they're both, there's not a lot of flaws in their game. I think when Skinner struggles, it's a lot of lateral movement. He looks slow in the net. But what about Bob? When he struggles, what becomes and what switch flips off in his game?
I think, again, he's just over athletic, right? At times, something that I probably struggled with, not to compare myself to Sergei Bobrovsky, because he would be on that upper level.
Someone ever said I'm over athletic. I've never heard that.
Over athletic. But, honestly, my problem is, Frank, I used to chase the game too much, right? When I was younger in my career and it was a night where maybe I wasn't getting a lot of action, it's almost like I wanted to put my mark on a game and I started trying to chase pucks where with experience, you really start to understand that like you can't control whether you're going to get 40 shots or whether you're going to get 15. And I think for Bobrovsky, when he gets out of his realm where he just looks rock solid, is he starts to chase the game a little bit, where he wants to make saves, he wants to be active, he wants to be a difference on the game. So that being said, I think if they can make it hard on him, and it doesn't necessarily mean quantity of shots, it means quality with traffic, making it hard on him, making him chase the game, where I think the Oilers will have an advantage in that area. And vice versa for Stuart Skinner, letting it come to him. He's a simple goalie. He's a big goalie. When he's within his post and he's playing well, he's shifting, he's letting the game come to him. And similar to me, I never had that advantage really in my game. I had to be athletic. But for Skinner, when he starts to chase the game and get outside his posts, we've seen his scramble game. It's not going to tend well for him.
All right, quickly, who you got in the series and why?
I like the Edmonton Oilers in 6 here. I just think Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, they are way too good of players to let this to go down 3-0 like they did last year. And I think Stuart Skinner is going to grow from last year's experience. And man, it'd be a shame sitting here in a few weeks and not seeing Connor McDavid lift the Stanley Cup, Frank.
Before we let you go, we got this one in the chat, and I kind of wanted to pick your brain on it too. The Ottinger versus DeBoer thing. Ottinger getting pulled in the way he did at the end of a timeout. What did you make of that? And then maybe a little story time. Did you ever have like a real awkward pull in your career?
Okay, well, I've had awkward pulls, trust me. There's been some bad ones, a couple shots out of the game, but the worst one I ever had was, I consider the one with Barry Trotz. We lost 2-1 in Carolina, and this was when Pekka Rinne was hurt, and I was just kind of cutting my teeth in the NHL, and he told the media wasn't good enough to play in the NHL. Like, that goaltending's not good enough for the NHL, and I got absolutely roasted on it. The next day, we had a tough conversation behind closed doors. He was apologetic, but it was one of those ones where it was a little bit of self-preservation. And that's what I felt Peter DeBoer was doing in this situation. But that being said, he also didn't have his star goalie that's locked up for 7 years, making 8.25, and I don't care what you want to talk about his numbers, his playoff numbers versus regular season numbers, they're pretty consistent. Save percentage. He's played a lot of minutes, and starting goalies like Jake Ottinger don't grow on trees, and he's 26 years old. So I didn't like how this was handled. I think things can be said behind closed doors. But that being said, I really hope things work out in Dallas, because he's one hell of a goalie.
Yeah, we'll see if Pete DeBoer lives that down.
Yeah, it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
Hut, enjoy the Stanley Cup Final. Thanks for popping on, man.
Thanks, guys.
What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you need to be hitting the subscribe button right here at Daily Faceoff. Exclusive interviews and analysis from our hockey insider Frank Saravalli, fantasy updates from Brock Sagan, and a daily live show at noon Eastern, Monday through Friday. You don't want to miss any of the fantastic content, so hit that subscribe button.